It was a calm morning on the outskirts of the Intergalactic Expeditionary Forces, IEF, training base, a vast military compound floating in the void of space, orbiting a distant and uninhabited planet. The silence was so overwhelming that even the occasional hum of the advanced tech seemed like a distant whisper. But something was off that day. There was an odd energy in the air. Private Theosian stood at attention beside his fellow soldiers, all in their standard combat uniforms. His hands felt clammy inside his gloves, but his training kicked in, and his face remained impassive. This was it, the big moment. His first deployment, the first mission where he'd prove himself to the veterans of the IEF. And it would be a tough one. He knew that much. Private Jin, came the smooth, commanding voice of Captain Ellis Jarrow. She was his direct superior and the only one who seemed unbothered by the stillness of space. Tall and athletically built, with jet black hair pulled tightly into a military bun, Jarrow was a living legend in the force. She had survived countless campaigns and earned a reputation as the leader who always got her people out alive, no matter the cost. "You're nervous." Jin snapped his gaze to the captain, blinking rapidly. Her voice was kind, but the edge of authority remained. He immediately straightened his posture. He knew better than to get caught off guard. "Of course not, Captain," he replied, his voice betraying the nervousness he felt. The entire squad stood at attention, eyeing him now. They were veterans, some of them even battle-hardened mercenaries from planets Shin had only heard of in stories. Jarrow tilted her head slightly, her piercing gaze scanning him like a hawk. "Good. We need people who can think quickly, not panic when things go south." Shin nodded, but inside, his stomach was in knots. As the squad of elite soldiers awaited their orders, Shin couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The IEF had received a distress signal from a nearby outpost. A scientific research station on an uncharted moon had sent a cryptic transmission, something about unusual readings and urgent evacuation needed, before the signal cut off entirely. Shin had heard rumors about what might have happened on that outpost. Whispers about hostile alien forces, or worse, a rogue faction within the military. But those were just rumors, weren't they? Shin was snapped from his thoughts as Captain Jarrow clapped her hands together, the sound echoing in the otherwise silent air. "Listen up," she barked, instantly commanding the room's attention. "This is your first deployment. It won't be easy, and it certainly won't be pretty. This isn't just a search and rescue mission, this is a full-scale recovery. That means we have to be prepared for anything." She turned to face the squad. "The outpost is on the moon of Glython. It's located in a sector known for hostile wildlife, but we're not dealing with that this time. We'll have to contend with whatever, or whoever, cut off the station's signal. We move quickly, we stay tight, and we don't assume anything. We've been given only a minimal briefing, don't take anything for granted." "Understood, Captain," the squad responded in unison. "Good," Jarrow replied. "Private Jin, you're on point. Keep your eyes open." Jin gulped, his mind racing. On point? That meant he would be the first to step into the unknown, the first to face whatever they would find on Glython. No pressure, right? Jin adjusted the helmet on his head, the digital HUD lighting up in his vision as he tried to focus. There were so many things to think about: his breathing, the weight of the gear, his weapon, the rocky surface of the moon they would soon land on. He didn't have time to second-guess himself. He knew that much. The next few moments seemed to fly by. The squad entered the transport vessel, a sleek and powerful ship designed for rapid deployment into hostile environments. They strapped in as the ship's engines roared to life, the vibrations shaking the seats beneath them. Outside, stars streaked past as the ship shot forward, heading toward Glython's moon. As they entered the atmosphere of Glython's moon, Jin could see the sprawling landscape below them. A barren wasteland of jagged rock, dark craters, and the occasional glint of ice reflected in the dim light. The contrast between the cold beauty of the planet and the tension in the ship's air was palpable. The transport landed with a soft thud, and the doors opened with a hiss. The squad filed out, weapons raised, their movements practiced and precise. Jin was the first to step off the transport, the gravelly surface crunching beneath his boots. His boots left a faint trail of dust in their wake as he surveyed the landscape. His pulse was racing, but he couldn't afford to show any hesitation. The comms in his helmet crackled to life. "We're looking at the exterior of the facility," Jiro's voice came through, calm and reassuring. "No signs of life, no movement. Move out." Jin led the way, his rifle at the ready, scanning the area. The others followed, weapons raised, scanning every shadow and every corner. There was no sign of trouble. Yet. Then, just as Jin was starting to think they had nothing to worry about, a chilling sound reached his ears, a low, throaty growl echoing through the cold air. It came from above. Before he could react, a massive shadow dropped down from one of the cliffs overlooking the facility. It was as if the shadow had been waiting for them all along. "Contact!" Jin shouted, diving to the side as the others scrambled for cover. The growl grew louder, and through the haze of dust and wind, Jin finally saw it. The creature was enormous. Its dark, scaled skin reflected the dim light, and its eyes glowed with an eerie, predatory intensity. Sharp talons scraped the ground as it landed, its massive wings folding behind it. It was a predator, built for speed and strength, with muscles rippling beneath its sleek armor-like hide. "Everyone stay down!" Jiro shouted, her voice sharp and authoritative. But Jin couldn't just stay down. He had to do something. The creature was too close, and it would be on them in seconds. Instinct kicked in. He wasn't sure how he knew, but he felt it. The creature's aggression was directed at him. He'd read about these creatures in military briefings, the Skarath. Ferocious, fast, and deadly, they were often used as biological weapons by hostile forces. They were programmed to hunt, to kill, and to never stop. And it was coming for him. Jin ducked behind a boulder, heart hammering in his chest. His weapon was useless in close quarters like this. He needed something else, something different. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a small, handheld device, a flashbang. Without thinking, he pulled the pin and hurled it in the creature's direction. The explosion of light and sound blinded the Skarath, and for a moment, it paused, disoriented. Jin used that split second to move, darting to the side and drawing a combat knife. The others were opening fire, but the Skarath was fast, too fast. It leapt toward Jin with terrifying speed. And then, just as quickly, it stopped. Jin blinked in confusion. He had expected it to pounce, but instead, the creature's glowing eyes flickered, and its massive body seemed to stiffen. Jiro's voice rang out over the comms again, but this time, it was filled with disbelief. "Jin, what did you do?" He looked up, confusion still clouding his thoughts. But before he could answer, the Skarath dropped to the ground with a thud, unconscious. Behind it stood someone Jin had never seen before. A figure in full combat armor, but not military-issued. This was different. More alien. And the weapon in their hands was not one Jin recognized. The figure tilted its helmet slightly, its posture stiff and military. "Nice job, kid. You just bought me enough time to get the shot." Jin's mind was racing, unable to fully process what was happening. His heart pounded in his chest as the figure slowly approached. He couldn't believe it. Was this some kind of rescue? Or a new threat? His gaze locked with the helmet of the mysterious figure, and a chill ran down his spine. The moment the creature crumpled to the ground, the squad's weapons dropped to their sides, their attention fully focused on the mysterious figure that had just appeared out of nowhere. The silence that followed was so profound that Jin could hear the sound of his heartbeat in his ears, loud and erratic. He glanced back at Captain Jiro, her sharp eyes narrowing in suspicion. She was always the first to assess a situation with cold, calculating precision. Jin, still gripping his knife, kept his stance low, his instincts telling him to be wary of the stranger, despite their apparent help. The mysterious figure was tall, their armor not like anything Jin had ever seen. It was sleek and dark, shimmering with an almost ethereal glow, and looked far too advanced for the tech the IEF used. There were no visible markings, No indication of rank or origin. The figure's helmet was featureless, with a smooth, reflective surface. Even the visor was black, hiding any trace of their face. They could have been anyone, or anything. Jin watched as the figure took a step toward them, their posture oddly calm, like they were already in complete control. Jin's breath caught in his throat. Was this some sort of rogue operative? An enemy soldier pretending to be a savior? "You're a little late to the party," Captain Jero said, her voice sharp but curious. She gestured toward the fallen Scarath. "What's your name, and why are you here?" The figure stood still for a moment, as if contemplating the question. Then, in a voice that sent a chill down Jin's spine, deep, gravelly, yet somehow strangely comforting, they spoke. "I'm not here to answer questions. I'm here to make sure you don't end up dead. And if you want to survive on this moon, you'd better listen." There was something unsettling about the way they spoke. It wasn't just the words, but the tone. It was as if they had been speaking to soldiers their entire life, as if this whole situation was mundane to them. Jin couldn't shake the feeling that this figure wasn't just here by chance. They were far too composed for that. Jero tilted her head, considering the statement. "How do you know what's out there?" "We just got here. We're still trying to figure out what's going on." The figure shifted slightly, casting a glance around them. "You think you're the first to investigate this outpost? The first to be drawn into this mess?" They didn't wait for a response. The station on Glithin was abandoned years ago, after a project went terribly wrong. You might have been sent here to recover lost equipment, but the truth is much darker than that. Jin felt his stomach churn. What kind of project could have caused a whole research station to be abandoned and its signal cut off? His mind was racing, trying to piece together what the figure was implying. "We've been getting reports of strange readings coming from this moon," Jin said, his voice tentative, trying to make sense of it all. "But there's no concrete information. We just came to investigate." "Investigate, huh?" The figure laughed, though it sounded more like a bark. "You think you're dealing with some minor anomaly, but this place is a tomb. What you're investigating isn't just some malfunctioning equipment. It's a weapon. A curse that's been buried for years." Jero stepped forward, her hands resting on her hips, her demeanor still cool but now tinged with intrigue. "A weapon? From who?" The figure hesitated, and Jin could swear they were scanning the horizon, almost as though they were looking for something. Then, with a sigh, they finally spoke again. "It's not about who. It's about what. And it's not just about you. It's about everyone." Jin's mind raced. Something about the figure's cryptic responses made him uneasy. The more the stranger spoke, the more Jin felt the sense of danger creeping in, the knowledge that they were on the edge of something far larger than a simple military mission. Just then, the distant rumble of thunder echoed through the moon's barren landscape. It was strange. There hadn't been any storms in the forecast, and the planet wasn't supposed to have much of an atmosphere to generate lightning. A sudden unease gnawed at the back of Jin's mind. "Captain," Jin said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's something off about this whole situation. This doesn't feel like a regular deployment." Jero shot him a quick look, her eyes narrowing with thought. "I know, Jin. But right now, we don't have the luxury of questioning every detail. Stay focused." The figure's gaze flicked toward Jin, and their helmets seemed to lock onto his eyes. For a moment, Jin felt a strange tension build in the air, as if the figure could see straight through him. "I can tell you have a lot of questions, kid," the figure said, their voice softer this time. "But you don't want the answers." "Not yet." Before Jin could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. It wasn't just a passing quake or a shift in the crust of the moon. This was something else entirely. The very earth beneath their boots seemed to shudder in response to some unseen force. Jero's voice broke through the sudden tension. "Everyone, take cover. Now." Without hesitation, the squad scrambled for cover, moving toward the base of a nearby rock formation. Jin's pulse spiked as he ducked behind a large boulder. His eyes shot toward the mysterious figure, who remained standing, their arms crossed as they observed the shaking ground. The tremors grew stronger, and a loud screeching noise filled the air, a high-pitched, unnatural sound. Jin could feel the vibrations now, crawling up his spine, resonating deep within his bones. Then, from the distant horizon, a shadow appeared. It was a massive shape, so large that it seemed to eclipse the faint light coming from the distant stars. A creature. No, multiple creatures. A swarm. Scareth, the figure muttered, finally revealing the name of the beasts Shin had heard about but never seen. They've been awakened. And they're not just hunting for food. They're hunting for you. Shin's stomach dropped as the reality of the situation settled in. These creatures weren't just mindless predators, they were a force of nature, and something was controlling them. They weren't attacking randomly. They had a purpose, and that purpose was to wipe out anyone who stepped foot on this forsaken moon. The squad opened fire on the approaching swarm, but the creatures didn't seem to care. They moved with terrifying speed, crawling over the craggy surface like an unstoppable tide. Shin's eyes locked onto one of the creatures, a massive, sleek Skarath, its teeth glinting in the dim light. It let out a roar that shook Shin to his core. Jero's voice came through the comms, sharp and commanding. Stay focused. Fall back to the transport and regroup. But Shin couldn't move. The swarm was coming too fast. He had no choice but to follow his instincts, even if it meant doing something unorthodox. He threw his combat knife at the nearest creature, just enough to distract it. As it lunged toward him, he sprinted for the transport, his heart racing with every step. He wasn't sure if he was going to make it. The swarm was closing in. The situation was spiraling out of control. And with every second, the mystery of what was happening on Glithin grew darker, more dangerous. The roar of the Skarath creatures filled the air like a chorus of nightmarish symphonies. Shin's pulse was thudding in his temples as he sprinted toward the transport, his heart pounding with fear, adrenaline, and a gnawing sense of dread. His mind raced, calculating each step, each decision, knowing that even the smallest mistake could mean death. Move, move, move. Captain Jero's voice crackled through the comms, commanding, unyielding. The squad was retreating, firing their weapons at the advancing swarm of Skarath. But the creatures were relentless. Bullets tore through their bodies, but the Skarath kept charging, unaffected, their blood an eerie, glowing green that splattered on the rocky terrain. There was no slowing them down. Shin's legs burned with the effort of running, but he could hear the creatures' claws scraping across the ground, their shrieks growing louder. He could see the edge of the transport just ahead, the hatch still open, ready for them to scramble to safety, but there was no guarantee they would make it. The swarm was closing in fast. A flash of dark movement to Shin's left snapped his attention to the side. A Skarath leapt through the air, its jaws wide and glowing with an unnatural hunger. Shin didn't even have time to aim. His rifle was still strapped to his back, useless for the close-quarters combat he was about to face. Instead, he dove, rolling to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature's sharp talons as it crashed into the ground where he'd been standing only a second before. He landed hard on the ground, his helmet slamming against the rocks, and for a moment, everything blurred. The world spun in dizzying circles. He shook his head, forcing himself to focus as the creature recovered, its eyes locking onto him. Then, just as quickly as it had lunged, the Skarath was flung aside, skidding across the dirt. Shin blinked in surprise as the mysterious figure from earlier, still standing as though nothing fazed them, dropped from the shadows, their alien weapon raised. They'd sliced through the Skarath with deadly precision, cutting through its thick hide like it was nothing more than paper. You can't outrun them, the figure said, their voice low, emotionless. You can only outsmart them. Shin scrambled to his feet, his mind still reeling. The figure was right. They couldn't fight off the entire swarm. Even if they managed to kill one or two, there were hundreds more, and they were coming fast. I'm not sure what your plan is, Shin said, his voice tight with frustration, but if it involves just standing here and shooting, it's not going to work. We're outnumbered. The figure paused, their head tilting as though considering his words. They looked back at the transport, which was now under heavy fire. The soldiers inside were trying desperately to load up and take off, but the swarm was preventing them from escaping. It was a ticking clock. "We need to use the environment," the figure said, turning to Jin with a hard gaze. "Draw them into the caves. They'll be less effective in close quarters." Jin's breath hitched. "Caves? Are you insane? We're going to run right into their territory." "Not their territory," the figure corrected, "your territory. You're not running into a trap, kid. You're using your environment to your advantage. If we stay out here, we're dead. If we draw them in, we've got a shot." Jin hesitated for a moment. The figure's confidence was both unnerving and oddly comforting. There was something about their demeanor, something that told Jin they knew more than they were letting on. But he didn't have time to second-guess. The swarm was closing in, and the sounds of their approaching footsteps reverberated through the ground. He glanced back at Captain Jero, who was covering their retreat. She nodded toward the rocky outcroppings in the distance, caves hidden in the jagged cliffs. They were their only hope. "Everyone, fall back to the caves. Move it!" Jin shouted, his voice carrying over the chaos. The squad obeyed immediately, sprinting in the direction he'd indicated. Jin and the mysterious figure followed closely behind, staying just ahead of the pursuing creatures. The air was thick with tension as the group raced toward the cliffs, the sound of Skarath's screeches echoing in the distance. Jin could feel the ground trembling beneath him as the creatures charged. Just as they neared the entrance to the nearest cave, Jin could hear the Skarath close behind. Their claws scraped across the rocky surface with maddening speed. But as Jin reached the mouth of the cave, he didn't hesitate. He dove inside, narrowly avoiding a swipe from one of the creature's talons. The cave was narrow, its walls rough and jagged. Jin's breath came in ragged gasps as he stumbled to his feet, his rifle still slung across his back. The rest of the squad followed, ducking into the cave for cover. They barely had time to catch their breath before the first of the Skarath came charging in. The creature entered the cave at a full sprint, its talons scraping against the stone floor. It barely had time to react before Jin hurled himself to the side, narrowly dodging its massive bulk. The creature's claws scraped through the air with deadly intent, but Jin managed to get just enough distance to avoid being struck. The rest of the squad opened fire, but the narrow confines of the cave made their shots less effective. The creatures were relentless, their movements too quick to be stopped by conventional weapons. One of the soldiers was knocked off their feet, their rifle spinning out of reach as a Skarath lunged toward them. Jin acted without thinking. He grabbed a loose rock from the cave floor and hurled it at the creature, striking it square in the face. The Skarath let out an enraged screech, temporarily stunned by the blow. It turned toward him, its glowing eyes locking onto him with a deadly hunger. The figure, who had been standing at the entrance, suddenly lunged forward. They didn't hesitate, didn't flinch. They moved like a shadow, swift and calculated. In one fluid motion, they used their alien weapon to decapitate the Skarath with a single stroke. Its head tumbled to the ground, its body falling lifelessly to the floor of the cave. "Not bad, kid," the figure muttered, wiping their weapon clean. "But we're not done yet." The sound of more Skarath echoed down the tunnel, their growls reverberating in the walls. The cave entrance was now blocked by at least a dozen of the creatures, their glowing eyes flashing with anger as they began to advance. Jin took a deep breath, his mind racing. The plan was simple, but it wasn't going to be easy. They had to hold the line, there was no way out now. "We need a choke point," Jin said quickly. "Somewhere narrow where they can't all fit through at once." "We've got a few tunnels up ahead," Jero called out, her voice tight with focus. "Let's move. Everyone fall back deeper into the cave." Jin didn't hesitate. He dashed deeper into the dark cavern, his squad following in quick succession. The mysterious figure was right on their heels, moving with eerie precision. As they reached a narrow passage, Jin's heart raced. This was it. There was no turning back. The Skarath were closing in, and the fight for survival had just begun. The cave was alive with sound. The Scaratha's growls echoed through the narrow passage, each one a chilling reminder of the relentless swarm closing in. Jin's chest heaved with every breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had never felt so alive, so acutely aware of the razor-thin line between life and death. They were deep in the heart of the cave now, the narrow passage barely wide enough to allow them to move in a single file. Behind them, the rest of the squad was setting up a last line of defense. Jin, Captain Jero, and the mysterious figure stood at the front, watching the entrance. The sound of the Scaratha's claws scraping against the cave walls grew louder, their numbers increasing by the second. Jin glanced back, seeing his squad mates setting up explosives near the tunnel's opening. They were preparing for a last-ditch effort, a desperate attempt to slow down the swarm long enough for them to escape. It was a plan full of risk, but it was the only plan they had left. "How much time do we have?" Jin asked, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts racing through his mind. He turned to the figure, who had been oddly calm throughout the entire ordeal. The figure's head tilted slightly as they stared into the darkness. "They'll be here soon," was all they said, their voice low but unwavering. "You need to be ready." Jin swallowed. Ready for what? To fight for his life? To sacrifice everything for the squad? He wasn't sure he could answer that question yet. But he knew one thing for certain, they weren't getting out of this unscathed. The explosives were ready. The trap was set. But there was one problem. Even with the explosives, even with the advantage of the narrow tunnel, the sheer number of Scarath meant that it would only slow them down. It wouldn't stop them. "I don't like this," Jin muttered, his mind spinning. "We don't have enough time to set everything up. The Scarath are too fast. We'll be overwhelmed." Jero shot him a look, a faint smile tugging at her lips despite the situation. "You're thinking too much, Jin. Sometimes, it's better to trust your instincts than overthink things. We've got one shot at this." One. Jin didn't have time to respond before the first Scarath appeared at the entrance of the passage. Its silhouette was dark against the glow of the cave's distant light, and Jin could see the glint of its sharp talons as it crept forward, its glowing eyes searching for prey. Behind it, more creatures followed. "Now," Jero commanded, her voice steady. "Take cover." The squad retreated deeper into the passage as the first of the Scarath leapt into the narrow tunnel, its claws scraping against the rock. The explosives detonated with a thunderous blast that echoed through the cave. The shockwave sent rocks tumbling, and the Scarath screeched in agony as they were thrown back. But the explosion didn't stop them. It only delayed them. "Get ready!" Jero shouted. "Hold the line." The first Scarath made it through the debris and into the narrow space, its eyes flashing with fury. Jin fired, his pulse racing as the rifle in his hands kicked with each shot. His aim was true, but the creature barely flinched. It was a behemoth, built to endure, to survive. Jin gritted his teeth and fired again, this time aiming for its head. It worked. The creature's head exploded in a burst of glowing blood, and it collapsed in a heap at Jin's feet. But there was no time to celebrate. More Scarath were pouring in, their forms blotting out the light, their shrieks filling the air like a chorus of nightmares. "We can't hold them off forever," Jin shouted, his voice a mix of desperation and resolve. "We don't need to," came the figure's calm response. Jin turned, about to question the stranger's cryptic words, but the figure was already moving. They sprinted toward the entrance of the tunnel, their body a blur of speed. In the blink of an eye, they were upon the first wave of Scarath, their weapons swinging in a fluid arc. With each swing, another creature fell, their bodies crashing to the ground in a heap. Jin's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the figure fight with impossible skill, moving like they had trained for this moment their entire life. There was no hesitation, no fear, only pure, cold efficiency. It was like watching an executioner at work. But there were too many. The Scarath began to press forward, their numbers overwhelming the group's defensive position. The explosives had slowed them, but not enough. Jin's eyes darted around the cave, searching for any sign of hope, any way out. Then, it clicked. "Jero!" Jin shouted. "The transport. We can't get to the entrance, but we might be able to use the secondary tunnels leading to the lower levels. The Scarath won't be able to follow us there." Jero didn't hesitate. She gave Jin a sharp nod. "Move! Now!" Jin spun, rallying the squad to follow him. They dashed through the maze of rocky corridors, taking a narrow, winding path that led them deeper into the heart of the cave system. The ground beneath their feet was unstable, the walls jagged and sharp, but they pressed on, knowing that their lives depended on their ability to move quickly. The mysterious figure stayed behind, their form already becoming a shadow in the midst of the chaos. Jin had no idea what their plan was, but something told him the figure wasn't going to let them down. He only hoped they weren't making a mistake by trusting someone they knew so little about. As they reached a dead-end tunnel, Jin signaled the squad to stop. They had no choice now but to make their stand. The entrance was blocked, the Scarath still hunting them, but the figure had given them a chance. "You know what to do," Jero said, her voice grim but resolute. "We don't leave anyone behind. We hold the line." The last few soldiers took up positions, readying their weapons, but Jin had a feeling that this was going to take more than just firepower. The mysterious figure had given them an opening, now they had to use it. Jin's mind raced with possibilities. The Scarath were relentless, but there had to be something they hadn't considered, something that would turn the tide. "Everyone, fall back to the central cavern," Jin called. "I've got an idea." They moved quickly, the sound of the Scarath closing in behind them, their screeches growing louder. They reached the central cavern just in time for Jin to activate the last of the explosives. The explosion lit up the cavern, sending a shockwave through the rock, knocking the remaining Scarath off their feet. For a moment, there was silence. And then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, a silhouette in the dim light. The mysterious figure had come back. "I told you," they said, their voice filled with cold confidence. "Survival is a game of patience, of knowing when to strike." And with that, they turned, walking deeper into the cave, leaving the squad to catch their breath and regroup. The battle wasn't over, but they had bought themselves time. Jin stood still for a moment, the weight of what had just transpired settling over him. The figure was more than just a soldier, they were a survivor, and now, they were allies. They had changed the course of the battle, but Jin knew this was far from over. "We'll be ready for whatever comes next," Jin muttered to himself, a small sense of determination welling up inside him. "We're not just soldiers. We're survivors." The mystery of Glithin was far from solved, but they had survived another day. And for now, that was enough.